Please welcome Karl Soule.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay.
All right, yeah, it's been an exciting month of October. We've been doing a lot. There's another broadcast show that we just wrapped up doing, like the first 5 episodes, just as kind of a test. One of the myths that we still are kind of actively fighting with among a lot of the various post and finishing houses is whether or not you can actually use Premiere in a full workflow with turnarounds for audio, turnarounds for color, finishing, and so on, and conform. And that's one of the areas that our team has been actively fighting against. We just did that with 5 episodes of a show I'm not allowed to mention yet, but hopefully we will be able to do that soon. And in the meantime, shows like Mindhunter, the David Fincher's editorial crew, people like Tyler Nelson have been using Premiere for quite a while now. They kind of got started because Fincher likes to keep everything in-house, visual effects wise. A lot of that show, you would be surprised how much of that show are split screen composites with different, the actor on the left and the actor on the right are actually from different takes. There's been speed ramps done to them. They've been pushed a little bit closer together and the shot even gets reframed sometimes in post. So you wouldn't think of that type of a show as a visual effects show, but it actually is. And that's one of the reasons why Premiere becomes essential to the workflow. Working with Billy on Only the Brave, we actually worked with and we recommended a gentleman for doing some temp visual effects work. A gentleman named John Carr was hired to do a lot of the temporary particle effects and things using Adobe After Effects with smoke and little embers flying through the air and things like that. His work ended up, Joe Kaczynski, the director, liked it so much. A number of the finished shots were actually in the film. John actually did the final shots for the film. So there were scenes in that movie that were done in After Effects. ILM did the bulk of the real fire and things. I want to make that perfectly clear. But definitely, what was supposed to be just temp visuals for some of the screenings was good enough that it ended up in the final film. And that was kind of the whole mindset working on Only the Brave, was they wanted to make the temp screenings, they wanted to make those as good as possible. So Billy cut in 5.1 surround sound. They did some temp color work directly in the timeline to just kind of tweak the color a bit using things like the Lumetri panel, and they turned around their own DCP files in-house. So it was a good experience. All right. I don't have any slides tonight. I'm just going to kind of jump in and start talking about some of the different features in all the various applications. So I'm going to be jumping around between Premiere, obviously. How many here have ever seen Character Animator? We're going to be showing a little bit of some of the new features inside of Character Animator. So wait. Yeah. Hold on. Let me check something. Okay. So there's a lot you can do with this now. We're going to get involved with After Effects. I'll be talking about some of the new features in After Effects, including some of the new VR features. And lastly, we're going to cover at least a couple new features inside of this release of Adobe Audition. So there's new versions of all the applications were just announced and began shipping last week. So if you haven't downloaded these yet, obviously go to your Creative Cloud application, new versions of all the different applications, and you can just download them from here. Once you do that, you'll have the new updated apps. One thing I always want to warn you about, the very first time you go to install a new application, there's a little hidden checkbox that comes up. I'll do this on Illustrator just as an example here. If I click on Install, oops, maybe I did this too soon. Yep, I did it too soon. The thing you want to do, in this application, there is, by the default behavior that this is going to do is actually uninstall your previous version to reinstall just to clear up the hard drive space. So if you if you want to keep the older versions of the apps, is what I'm getting at, you do want to make sure and kind of twirl things down, make sure that you uncheck the little box that says, delete the other applications off my system. The default behavior is it wants to just give you the latest and greatest and get rid of any of the old versions. And I'm one of those people that I tend to keep old versions on your system. It doesn't hurt anything, it just takes up a little bit more storage space, and it just gives me that capability. If I'm in a situation with people using other versions of Premiere that I need to kind of get into, make some changes, and hand the file back, I still have like an older version of 2017, 2016, 2015, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, to jump in and get started, I'm going to start over in Premiere and talk a little bit about one of the biggest new features of this version of Premiere. We've been spending a lot of time adding a feature in particular for those who came from a Final Cut 7 background. It's been a long time coming. I can remember back asking for this feature going all the way back maybe 7 years. To probably CS5, people were asking for it, and engineering always looked at me and said, it's never going to happen. It's happened. I now have the ability to open as many project files at a time that I might want to have open. Thank you. So what this means is if I have another project that I need to cut something out of and paste it in, if I'm working on a feature film, I can break up my feature film into Reel 1, Reel 2, Reel 3, and so on. And if I need to cut something off the end of Reel 2 and put it on the head of Reel 3, I have the ability to do that. So, yeah.
Is that a project?
That's a great question. So the question was...
Can you repeat the question for everyone?
Absolutely. Does this help with load times if I have a massive project, if I've broken it up into different segments, does that mean that each of those segments is going to load faster? Yes, indeed. A lot of our marketing literature just talks about the idea of just having random different projects open. Right now you can see, if I kind of scroll down here, you can see that I have a project here called Motion Graphic Improvements. I also have a project open called Premiere Pro Immersive Video. So these are two separate projects that I have open simultaneously, and I can kind of toggle back and forth between them. You can have them floating as windows. I kind of like having them docked in this little location down here at the bottom. So if I needed to, I could select some items here, cut them, paste them over into this. I could have a timeline open from this project, and I could go into this project and drag clips over into into that timeline. So it gives me the ability to work really, really effectively when I have things broken up into different projects. Now, for this market in particular, we've actually also added something that builds onto this multiple open projects. We've added something we are calling shared projects. And I'm going to switch over to something I have here, which is something I'm calling my Hollywood Master Project here. Now, I'm going to use just a quick, how many here are avid editors? Just out of curiosity? Okay. The way I want you to think about this, if you are coming from an Avid background, the Avid project file really doesn't have a lot of information in it. It's got like a frame rate and a resolution, but you don't really typically put anything in the project itself. You store things in bins. A Premiere project is actually a lot closer in structure and format to a bin. It actually contains sequences. It contains master clips. You can trim those master clips, have them in a bin. And it can contain, kind of like subfolders within that bin. One of the things that we have added now is if you want to, you can work in a Premiere project file that I'm calling, just for the sake of kind of referencing it, I'm calling it a master project. It's still a project, just a regular project file. It's nothing different on disk. But within that project file, I have the ability to actually create shared projects. Now, what these are new Premiere project files. They're just standard PROJ files, but they're independent files on the hard drive. And so if I'm using shared storage, it's possible for multiple people to have kind of lock and unlock these different shared projects. I'll show you a quick example here. I've taken this project that I have called Master Project. There's really nothing inside of it right now except for these shortcuts to other project files. Now, if I were to go to my Finder, I'll just close and move this out of the way here. You'll notice these are all Premiere Pro project files with names like sound effects, select reels, music, Friday dailies, and so on. These are sort of aliases to those project files on disk. So when I double click on, let's say, my music project, I've now opened up this music project. This is a separate project on disk. In theory, another editor could actually have this open and be adding to it and making changes to it. You'll notice down in the lower corner, there is a little lock icon for this. Now, to prevent two people from accidentally saving over the top of each other's work, by default, when I open up one of these projects, like the music project, I'm opening it in read-only mode. If I'm going to make changes to this, I can click the lock icon, and as long as nobody else has it open, I now have read-write privileges. I can reorder, I can add more media, I can import some more music clips to my music project. You'll notice down in my master project, since I have this music folder, or this music bin open in read-write mode, it's put my name next to it here in this column. If my assistant has the dailies or has the audio turnovers folder open and is making changes inside of that, I would see my assistant's name show up here. And if I were to try and open that in read-write mode, it would give me a message saying, I can't, your assistant's got it open right now. So it gives me that confidence that nobody else, only one person within my facility can have a folder or can have a bin or a shared project. You can call it what you like. It's still new and we're still kind of seeing how people adapt to this. But only one person can have each of these open in read-write mode, but everybody can have them open in read-only mode. Make sense? And because we have this new metadata column here called project lock, whatever user is holding the lock, we know at a glance who that is. Now, this name that you see here, it says K. Soule. If I go to my preferences, we have a new preference for something called collaboration. And inside the collaboration preferences, this is where you can enable project locking, and this is where you can put in a username. If you're in a facility where everybody is moving around, but you have Edit Bay 1, Edit Bay 2, Edit Bay 3, then enable project locking, and for username, you would have Edit Bay 1, Edit Bay 2, Edit Bay 3. So at a glance, everybody can see who's got that locked. Whoever is in Edit Bay 2, I know what number to call, I know how to pick up the phone or walk over and unlock that if I need access to it. If something is locked, so let me see here, if I come down here, I'll just open up my selects reels. And I'm going to go ahead and make this read-only for me. If I start to try and change things, maybe I want it read-only because I'm just doing a review with the client and they're looking at it going, what did you do to the color? Well, I'll show you that in a second here. If I accidentally forget, if I'm in the middle of reviewing this and I start to pick something up and move it, it ain't gonna let me. Why? It's read-only. So there's no chance that I can start down a path and make a bunch of changes and start doing some editing and then suddenly go to save and realize, oh wait, this is locked, somebody else has access to it, I've got to save it a different name and then reconcile those changes with what somebody else did. If I want to change this sequence, I have to click the lock, I have to take ownership of that project, and now I can come in and start to make changes. Make sense? Any questions? Now, I think I'm seeing a question there.
Yeah, quick question. Is there a way to tell who does what changes at what time?
Is there a way to tell who does what changes at what time?
Yeah.
If I see that one of these bins has a red lock icon and I see here that it's locked by one of my assistant editors, if they start to make changes to that, I'll actually get a little icon up near the top of that project name. If I have it open up in read-only mode here, I'll get one of those little, you've seen it before, it's basically like two arrows in a little circle indicating that you need to refresh it. So if anybody is making active changes to this, I don't have to close it and reopen it. I can just click that refresh icon and it'll refresh the contents of that bin. Now, by doing this, how long do you think it takes me to open up this master project? A second, because there's nothing in it. Everything is in these separate shared projects. So for situations where I just need to get up and running and I'm working on a particular sequence, I can just go to that folder with that reel or that set of sequences and begin to work. What typically bogs down a Premiere Pro project is if you've got a library of 50,000 sound effects, you probably imported 50,000 clips. You've imported those into your project. If you break that into a separate folder called sound effects, when you're doing sound work, you'll have to double click on that. It'll take a little while for it to load. If you're not doing that on a day in and day out basis, and you've set aside some time for doing sound, you can kind of budget as you go rather than having to pay up front and spend 2 or 3 minutes waiting for your project to open. So that's why we're moving to this new mindset. Any other questions? Yeah.
So if I've got a sequence open in one of those, actually let's ask this question. So say I'm grabbing footage from Friday's dailies, but I want to cut into a different bin. What happens to the footage? Do I end up with duplicates of that footage in the new bin, or is there a way to add it?
So good question. So in this situation, I've kind of broken things up into a Friday dailies folder. Oh, looks like I have nothing in there. I'll tell you what, I'm going to go into, I have something called Dailies Backup, which is something where I have a bunch of footage and it's all got metadata and it looks all pretty. So let's say I want to take some of these clips and I want to cut them in. If I start cutting these clips into my timeline, what happens in my selects timeline? That's up to you. There's 2 different ways of working. In the preferences in Premiere, if I go under Media, there's a new option called Automatically Hide Dependent Clips. If this is turned on, what this means is those dependent clips, obviously when I'm taking a clip from one project and I'm putting it on a sequence in another project, the default behavior for Premiere is to say, well, you've just moved that clip from one project into another project. I'd better make a copy of it. I'd better put it in that other project. A lot of editors don't like to work that way. It clutters up their project. They end up with a lot of extra duplicate or a lot of dependent clips. If you turn this on, you can keep your sequence projects relatively clean, Now the dependencies are still there. If I want to view the dependent clips for this sequence, I can just right click and say view hidden, and it'll show me all those hidden clips. But for the most part, if you have this automatically hide dependent clips turned on, it's going to keep your bin clean. You can just do that, and it will keep those hidden. Now in this case, I've actually deliberately unhidden a couple of these clips just to kind of demonstrate this behavior. If I want to make these match the rest, I can just manually go in and hide those so that this selects reels, just keeps, it just has sequences. I don't have to see any of those dependent clips. Yeah.
What are potential gotchas in the first version of this that you may have seen?
What are potential gotchas that I may have seen? Because this is, that's a good question. This is the first release of this idea of shared projects. The biggest issue that we see is it is possible that because there is no difference on disk between a master project and a shared project, you know, between the master project and what we're using as a bin, it means that somebody can have one of these bins and start making shared projects within shared projects within shared projects. That's probably the biggest issue, that it's possible to do that. We just think people are going to lose stuff by doing that. I mean, it's like, it just becomes too many layers and too many folders and subfolders down when this is done.
So what are you recommending, a naming convention to specify between
master? Yeah. Yeah, so we're typically recommending like some kind of naming convention. Like in this case, I'm calling this my master project, and then these are all sub-projects. My assistants basically have two choices. They can just go on the Finder level and go to where all of my shared projects are. If they're just going to be working in, let's say, Dailies 2 for right now, they're bringing in more clips into Dailies 2, they can just come in and double click on Dailies 2. I will see, as the lead editor, I'll see their name and see that Dailies 2 is now locked, and it'll have their name next to it. They're just operating inside of the Dailies 2 project file. That's all they have open, so they can be doing whatever they need to do at that point.
How are you going to do changes? You have to force a refresh?
Yeah, that's a good question. So how we're getting their changes and how how a refresh happens. Anytime one of these projects has been touched by another editor, you will see, I wish I could show it to you. I didn't have the wherewithal to set up like shared storage and get this all going with 2 computers tonight. But next to the project name, you'll see that little refresh button will pop up. And so that'll indicate that you know, the current state of the project, somebody else has gone in and made some changes to it. So you don't have to close it and reopen it. You just hit the refresh button and it'll reopen or refresh the bin for you. All right. Big change. It is a 1.0 iteration of this, but we've been working on this. This is something brought to you specifically by the Hollywood team. You know, that we just knew we wanted to have better collaboration features for people local. You know, this is designed to work with pretty much any type of shared storage out there. So, you know, you can set it up, you know, anything from, you know, I have clients using it with, you know, something like Nexus storage. We've did demos at IBC with the LumaForge Jellyfish. So, you know, it definitely it scales with your localized storage. Now, this doesn't work if you need something that's more internet-based and you need to have like co-located media and you're kind of working together with somebody in New York, for example. Adobe does have a solution for that, for things like short-form work and for, you know, up to and including like 23-minute sitcoms. We had somebody produce a Netflix show using it. It's something called Team Projects. You really have to have a beefy internet connection here, and unfortunately I don't want to demo it to you tonight with the little MiFi that we have available, but this is something that people with Creative Cloud for Teams can use, and it's much more of an internet-centric way of working. With Team Projects, your project file is actually hosted in the cloud. You have to manage the media, and you can have different mount points for different people, can have different mount points. You use your Adobe ID as a way of seeing who is currently working within a team project. They all work together. I've actually seen some testing going on where somebody was using this shared projects functionality, and then they also opened at the same time, opened up a team project and copied a sequence over to a team project. So each methodology has its pluses and minuses, and they all do work together. I do not recommend team projects for long form work. It's in its 1.0 state now. Team projects is fully featured, but long form, the biggest issue at this point is when you get above about 40,000, 50,000 clips inside of a team project, the performance really starts to take a hit, and it's much better suited for short form. It's based on a technology that was used in news and broadcast for short form work for many, many years, so it's been well tested for short form work. Okay. Did I really take that much time just talking about one feature? Okay, I better move a little faster if I'm going to get through all this. How many here have played around with 360 or VR work? I hear some groans from the audience. Not that interested? Okay. All right, you guys want me to show it or not? Yeah? Okay.
Will you be in the lobby during the break?
I will be in the lobby for showing some of this during the break. For those who have been following VR and 360, Premiere's had some features built into it specific for doing 360, what we're now calling immersive video, for quite a while. But for people who got very serious with it, there was a plugin package called Metal Skybox that was instrumental in giving you a full set of tools for doing VR in 360. At Adobe, we really feel like this has a lot of legs. This is not the re-emergence of stereoscopic. I definitely feel like it's in its infancy. I think the best analogy that I can give you for it is if you think about the 50-year history of video games, 50 years ago, state-of-the-art was Pong. And then you think about today with all the games like, World of Warcraft and these amazing, immersive worlds where you're online with many people and, photorealistic graphics and whatnot. VR, from where it's going to, we're currently somewhere between Pong, Space Invaders, and Asteroids. It's early days. And the technology is definitely going to advance. But if you haven't played around with it, I definitely feel like this is something it's worth knowing about, because what I'm seeing a lot of today is for everybody who cuts a feature film, they're also adding some kind of an immersive experience for people who have these headsets. The Dunkirk VR experience, if you haven't seen it yet, is pretty darn amazing. And if you saw the film, if you want to experience being inside of a fighter pilot or a fighter plane while it's going down into the ocean, you get that experience watching the Dunkirk VR setup. So those are the types of things that we are seeing a lot of, and we're seeing a lot of people producing VR, and the technology is just going to keep going. I saw a sneak last week that actually lets you kind of move your head up and down, left and right, inside of a 360 video, which it's something called 6 Degrees of Freedom, and it's going to be around for a while. I definitely feel that way. And Adobe does as well. They've invested pretty heavily into 360 video, into immersive experiences. Chris Babatis, one of the founders of Metal, has joined Adobe as the director of immersive experiences. Metal is going to continue as a separate company, and they actually have a new plugin, something called Mantra, that's worth checking out for doing motion graphics. But we felt the Skybox tools were something everybody doing VR 360 video should have access to. So within Premiere, if I'm working with 360 video, we've had for a while the ability to toggle on sort of a pan around experience when you're working in 360. That's nothing new. If you want to get a chance upstairs, what I have set up there is actually the opportunity to put on and strap the headset. You too can look as cool as all those guys going like this with the headset on. What we have added in the latest version of Premiere is if you use one of the state-of-the-art headsets, specifically the HTC Vive or the Oculus Rift, you can see the hand controller in the headset, and the play button and the timeline button will appear in front of you as you're moving it around. It's actually much smoother than what you're seeing here. A screen capture is kind of a poor limitation of it, but I don't have headsets for all of you tonight. So if you want to test this out, you can definitely do this up top. This is showing kind of the rocker control where you can rock a few frames left or right. You can also go half speed is what it's showing there. As you move the controller up while you have the play button down, you can go up to 2x speed. And then if you go downward, you can go backwards up to 2x speed. Lastly, you push the other button and your timeline will appear in front of you. And you can scrub the timeline by pulling the trigger on the hand controller. So one of the challenges that we kept seeing people doing is when you get this far into your production where you've got all the clips on the timeline, you've basically done your first rough cut, and now you're kind of trying to trim it out. People wanted to see that with the headset on, but then they were taking the headset off, making a couple changes, putting the headset back on again. With this, I can use the controller in my right hand. I can use my left hand to use keyboard shortcuts like Q and W to start, trimming the head, trimming the tail of clips based on the playhead position, so I can have the headset on while I'm actively making changes. So if you want more information about how to set this up, or if you want to just see it, I do have a machine set up upstairs to kind of showcase that, so you guys can check it out. It is a little Minority Report. You do have that feeling of like, where am I? What's going on? In addition to the fancy VR controller, the Skybox tools are now found in the effects panel. They're fully integrated into Premiere and After Effects. So if I do a search on the word immersive, I will see a new folder here for immersive video effects. So there are specific transition effects, there are specific immersive video effects that are designed around working in 360 video. One of the biggest challenges when you're working with 360 video is if you start to do things like blur the image, normally because you're basically taking a rectangle and you're wrapping it into a sphere, it's very easy to use effects and play with color and things that cause the seam to become very, very apparent. So these effects have been designed specifically to avoid that from happening. So for people working with 360, they're really important. The other thing that comes up is transitioning from one virtual environment to another. If you're typically wearing a headset and all of a sudden you get this hard cut from one location to another, it's really, really jarring on the audience. So coming up with ways to transition from one place to another become kind of important. One of my favorites, very simple transition that I can do here, and it's funny because it's kind of, what is old is now new again. The iris wipe, don't laugh, actually works really well as a transitional element in VR. So if I throw this across this, and I'm just going to use it as kind of an AX transition, I'll have Premiere repeat some frames here. What I can do from here, I'll go ahead and toggle off my VR view. You can see that that's doing a circle wipe from the center, but you'll notice how it distorts when it gets to the edges. It's doing the right thing for VR space. And with the controls that these transitions offer, I can go into the effect controls for this, and anybody see a circular element in the video? Something? The sun? By moving the transition to actually happen at the sun, surprisingly, it's a lot less jarring when you've got the headset on. You can see this upstairs a little bit later on, but now you know, there the other world is kind of peeking through the sun, and it's a little bit more of a pleasant experience. There are some ones in here that are kind of crazy, including some, you know, light leaks. There's one that's called random blocks that look like little pop, 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 little pieces kind of show up in play. I still find those to be a little bit scary, very matrixy when I've got the headset on. So, you know, discretion is advised. All right. The other thing that these also allow me to do is to create titles. So if I wanted to create a title in VR space, you know, again, I can use the new title tool in Premiere and click and start to create a title here. LACPUG. But the challenge with this, and I'm just going to go to my graphics workspace, and I've got this title selected already. So I can come in here and let's just use scale. We'll make that really big. If I'm wearing the headset, that title is going to kind of wrap and distort. It's not going to be flat in the screen there. So again, working with these immersive effects, and you can see now that that keeps the title nice and flat the way I had initially designed it. And now I can choose, you know, do I want to push it back? Do I want to bring it forward? And I can go through, there's some controls in here if I want to work with, you know, stereo, you know, how close or how far away from the headset do I want this? Another key thing is something called rotate sphere. You know, this is something for setting that 0 point, what's directly in front of me when I start watching the video. Sometimes, depending on how your clips are stitched together, you don't have control of that. So, a lot of different control in here. There's also a number of just small, newer enhancements inside of Premiere. I think one of the big ones that a lot of people will be happy with, people were saying they wanted more label colors. Yeah. So we now have, you know, teal, magenta, Dodger blue is in there. So, yeah, so we have more assignable label colors than before. There's also a nice new control in here for just closing gaps in the timeline. This will detect gaps in your timeline and allow you to do one-click close gaps if you've got gaps in your timeline. So there's a couple of smaller new enhancements inside of Premiere as well. Yes, is there a close gap shortcut? Yes. And if you haven't seen it already, you know, this was something that was added back in the spring. This, of course, is the new keyboard shortcut editor, which allows me to come in and actually see what, you know, what keys do what. And we now have the ability, if you want to just add a keyboard shortcut, you can just drag and drop to whatever key you want. So, okay, I'm going to move over to After Effects for a second. Just cover a little tiny bit of After Effects. Now, Premiere, of course, for VR and 360 is mostly geared towards the editorial environment, kind of putting everything together. After Effects for VR and 360 is mostly about doing things like rig removal, tracking, things along those lines. So there's a lot of tools inside of After Effects that are geared towards that. I'll just touch on a couple of them here. If I have this equirectangular view inside of After Effects and I want to see this in a view that'll make it easy to do tracking, a common format for doing tracking is something called a cube map. What this does is it takes what this equirectangular view and it instead pretends it's projected onto the 6 sides of a cube. So by doing that, the perspective is correct. You don't have all this crazy distortion like what you're seeing down here at the bottom. So we now have the ability to create a cube map directly inside After Effects. Now I did that deliberately because I wanted to show you this. The cube map function is a script. So you are going to want to turn on this little checkbox here to allow scripts to write files and access the network. That is a requirement for running this, but it just means that this will actually be able to write to the project file. So now I've got this little floating panel. I can dock it wherever I need to. In this case, I can go ahead and choose my which composition I'm working in, and I can go ahead and choose to extract a cube map. Now there's some nice options down here at the bottom. If I'm using edge blending, I want to turn that on. If I'm using 3D plugins, you want to turn this on. So if I'm going to bring in some 3D text from Cinema 4D, or if I'm working with Andrew Kramer's wonderful plugin for After Effects, this is something else that I want to turn on here. Click on Extract Cube Map, and now you can see I'm actively looking in a particular view here. If I select my 3D camera, I can actually rotate around and see the inside of my cube inside of After Effects. And at any point in the process, if I want to, I can go into a kind of a flattened cube map. If you think about, how a map is projected, you take the world and you get all those different Mercator projections. A cube map is really, really useful because you can use any existing tracking tools. Once I have this in a cube map, I could go in and use Mocha AE to track this. I could use the point trackers within After Effects, and I could, add virtual objects. I can also do paint and cleanup work. There's a lot of different options for working with 360 in here. I'm not going to go into, at the sake of time, all the different options. But we even have some special formats built in here. I'll turn off the lock, where if for some reason, because again, this is early days of 360 and VR, cube maps come in different shapes and sizes. So if you're sending one over to Facebook, you can actually set this to do a cube map in a special Facebook format where it takes up a little bit less real estate. It doesn't have the gaping holes that you see here. So a number of different options. Let's see. Here is let me just go back to the there's what a cube map looks like in Facebook format. Again, just a little bit more compact, a little bit harder to read for tracking purposes, but if you're sending something out to Facebook, that would be the way to map it. All right, enough on VR. Again, full set of tools. There's also new options for export when you're exporting your video out. Now, the next thing I want to cover is data-driven workflows. We've added some new features inside of After Effects for using a data file to create motion graphics. In particular, what we're actually using is something called a JSON file, a .json file. This is a human-readable text file that's used for all different types of things. If you've ever gone to a weather website, chances are it's reading the weather information and putting up the beautiful graphics and things from a JSON file. Originally we wanted to create a kind of an election map. I think we've all agreed that talking politics right now is not a good idea. So instead we're actually looking at a map of the United States, talking about what word people use for a canned beverage that is carbonated. So some people prefer the word pop, some use the word soda, some use a word that rhymes with joke that I'm not allowed to say. No guess, thank you. Now, instead of hand coding this is actually, what it's actually doing is reading from something called a JSON file. And if I do a search here on JSON, it will show me all the various JSON files. Now, if I take one of these, let me just reveal that in the Finder. And from here, I'm going to open that with a little application that I have called Brackets. You can open this inside of TextEdit. If you ever want to see it, Brackets is just sort of a, no, I don't want to get an update now. Is just sort of an easy way of reading this. It does some nice color coding for web developers here. But you can see that this has all of the information on a state-by-state basis of what state prefers pop, soda, or other. And I'm reading this information into this file. So long and the short of this, I don't know how many motion graphics people go that deep into these types of things, but the idea being we want to give you the tool set so that you can go out and you can actually use this information. If I make a change in the JSON file, it'll actually update the motion graphic that I'm looking at. So this is something that's very heavily tied into the idea of working with expressions. So I've created some sliders here, and I've got one for what's called the state ID. So if I pick up this slider and move it to a different ID, you can see there's California, says soda when referring to soft drinks. Let me move it to another state here. Massachusetts, also in the soda category. Ohio prefers pop. South Dakota prefers pop. So you can see how it's updating, and what's happening is this number is referencing a number, an ID number in that JSON file. So we see a lot of different opportunities for using JSON files within motion graphics workflows, particularly things that are coming in and being updated in real time. Elections are a great example of that. We're also seeing the advent of a lot more data. If you start to think of how you could get text formatted data from your camera, this is something that can be used with in JSON format. A lot of like motorsports these days, we're starting to see more and more information coming from motorcycles, cars, things like that want to be turned into different pop-up graphics. So this is, there's a lot of legs in this. Adobe's also introducing something called the motion graphics JSON format. So we've published a document that kind of documents how you can put something into a motion JSON format so that you could take things like the speedometer from a motorcycle and have that become an animated graphic based on that data coming in from the motorcycle. Got 8 minutes. Okay. All right. That's probably the biggest new feature in After Effects. Again, a lot of performance improvements. The biggest thing from a performance change inside of After Effects is instead of creating 1 or 2 new GPU accelerated effects in After Effects in this release, the team focused on making all of the basic transform properties are now GPU accelerated. So position, scale, rotation, opacity, and the biggest one is motion blur is now GPU accelerated in After Effects. So this updating of the code, kind of modernizing After Effects, it's been an ongoing process over multiple releases, but every release we're improving the speed and the performance inside of After Effects. So that's the big one to look at here. Not a lot of new like specialty onesie twosie effects. These are the properties that you use almost every day on every comp. So pretty excited about that. Audition, this release of Audition, we focused on a new feature in the Essential Sound panel. Now, a lot of you have seen me use Essential Sound in Audition before. We've got a great workflow where we can actually send a sequence from Premiere directly over into Audition, keep all of the keyframing, modifiable, transitions, effects, everything actually comes across, and we've got the best fidelity going from editorial into audio and mixing on the market. If you stay between the two applications, it's really, really really well done, and they're still separate applications, but basically Audition now opens the Premiere project file and just reads what's there. So even if you're using third-party plugins, as long as you have them in both Audition and Premiere, those will stay live when you move over to Audition. The Essential Sound panel I've shown this before. This lets me actually assign a role to my audio. I can pick which pieces of audio, which stems are dialogue, music, sound effects, or ambience. And what we have added in this release is under music, we now have a new function for auto ducking built directly in. So I can choose which other categories I want to duck against. So in this case, I've only selected ducking against dialogue. And if I come down here to my timeline, if you can see the little dotted line here, that dotted line represents where it's done the ducking. So this again is using sort of machine learning and intelligence to kind of go in there and figure this stuff out. It's using perceived loudness values. You do have a lot of options to come over here and make some changes if necessary. And there's also the ability to kind of take this out of automatic mode and give you the ability to actually start manipulating and moving those keyframes around. But even just in a normal mode here, I'll go ahead and play back the auto ducking that I've just done with this.
Hi. I'd like to get a drink, please.
Okay.
Great. I'd like an elderberry liqueur.
Oh, actually, we don't have that.
I've been here before, and I've definitely had it here, so you have it.
Oh, okay. I've only been working here for 5 years, so let me just check on that for you.
All right, thank you.
Oops. Now I've got this cranked up really, really strong, really high here, but I could go into the, I can go ahead and kind of expand that track out so that you can see it a little bit better there. I can go into the controls for this over here and choose maybe a slower fade time. And I could choose how much I want this to auto duck by. And I can also play with sensitivity. And these auto ducking markers will actually update for me as I'm doing this. So you can see as I play with sensitivity, you can see that the auto ducking is changing automatically. So now it's a little bit...
I'd like to get a drink, please.
Okay.
Great. I'd like an elderberry liqueur.
Oh, actually, we don't have that.
I've been here before, and I've definitely had it here, so you have it.
Oh, okay. I've only been working here for 5 years, so let me just check on that for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, we don't have it.
I just love that. She's all right. So auto ducking in the Essential Sound Panel. So if you follow the development of the Essential Sound Panel, you know that we have the Essential Sound Panel in both Premiere and Audition. Typically, in a lot of cases, these new features, the Audition team creates it first, and then they make their way into Premiere. So this is not something that is in Premiere today. It is only in Audition. However, we'll see how that goes in the future. We introduced the Essential Sound Panel last year in the spring. Everything that was in Audition in the fall last year made it into Premiere in the spring. So do with that what you will. All right, last but not least, my favorite application is something called Character Animator. Now, Character Animator is designed to take your webcam, and if I click this Set Rest Pose button, you can kind of see what it's doing there. It's actually tracking my eyes, it's tracking my face, and if I make that smaller, it's actually now tracking my character. We're super excited that this has now reached a 1.0 release. So what we're working with here is the full shipping 1.0 version. Now that has not stopped people from using this in real world production. The product actually changed because some of the people that were using it, some of you out there, actually added to what we could do in the production. More and more people wanted to be able to do live streaming with this, so we have added some new technology to do live streaming in this. It still requires other tools, but you can use things like NewTek NDI to go out to a broadcast monitor. You can use things like streaming tools and services that take a video feed input. We can send this out as a video feed into something to encode for Facebook. Some of the things I've seen recently that have used Character Animator, Mr. Bean did a Facebook Live section where they took the animated Mr. Bean character and actually had him interacting with people. How many My Little Pony fans out there? You're safe here. It's okay. The woman who does Twilight Sparkle, I'm forgetting her name right now. Very famous character voice actor. She actually did a live segment where people could interact on Facebook with this. And if you need to see a kind of day in and day out version of this and see how it's used in broadcast television, if you tune into the Stephen Colbert Show, they didn't want us to talk about this for the longest time because they felt like this was sort of their secret weapon. They can turn a character around in about 6 hours to get one on the air. And they've had a couple of cases where they've created a character and gotten to use them once, and that person was fired from the political scene. Yeah, I'm not going to mention any names, Scaramouche. But yeah, the idea behind this is this basically takes a PSD file or an Illustrator file. If you go to the Start tab within the application, there's a full interactive tutorial to get started using this, as well as some template characters which kind of teach you about different parts of how to use this. So it's the files underneath the hood are simply PSD files. I can see the layers here. If I come in and I do an edit original, it will open up in the original application that came from. Except I don't have the new version of Illustrator installed yet, so it gave me a preview. Okay, so that's an Illustrator document. So yeah, those are just a few of the new applications inside of Creative Cloud.
Thank you, Karl.